Hello, everybody. My name is Pablo Wojtkowski. I'm a faculty member at Northwestern University and the director of the Center for Latinx Digital Media. Thank you so much for joining us today for our weekly virtual seminar at the Center. It is really a pleasure to have you with us today. The mission of the Center is to create knowledge about digital media in Latinx communities across the Americas. And today's speaker is a leading scholar and administrator in this space. Hector Amaya is Professor of Communication Studies and Director of the Annenberg School of Communication at the University of Southern California. He is also Associate Dean of Diversity, Inclusion, Equity, and Access at the school. We are also joined by Mariana Sanchez Santos, who's a doctoral student at American University and an affiliate at the Center for Latinx Digital Media, who will introduce Hector in just a minute. Before I do that, I would like to start by acknowledging that Northwestern is a community of learners situated within a network of historical and contemporary relationships with Native American tribes, communities, parents, students, and alumni. It is also in close proximity to an urban Native American community in Chicago, and near several tribes in the Midwest. The Northwestern campus sits on the traditional homelands of the people of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Potawatomi, and the Ottawa, as well as the Menominee, Miami, and Ho-Chunk nations. It was also a site of trade, travel, gathering, and healing for more than a dozen other native tribes, and is still home to over 100,000 tribal members in the state of Illinois. It is within Northwestern's responsibility as an academic institution to disseminate knowledge about Native American peoples and the institution's history with them. Consistent with the university commitment to diversity and inclusion, Northwestern works towards building relationships with Native American communities through academic pursuits, partnerships, historical recognitions, community service, and enrollment efforts. Let me say briefly about how the seminar will unfold. First, Mariana will tell us more about Hector's research and career. Then Hector will deliver his seminar, and after that, we will open for questions. Please feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A function of the webinar, and Mariana and I will read them aloud and will moderate. And at the end, we'll deliver some closing remarks. Once again, many thanks for joining us, and without further ado, Mariana, the screen is all yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Pablo. I am so very honored to be here and very honored to present Dr. Amaya. Dr. Amaya holds a BA in Communication from the Metropolitan Autonomous University of Mexico and a PhD in Radio, Television, and Film from the University of Texas at Austin. Currently, Dr. Amaya is Professor of Communication and Director of the Annenberg School of Communication in the University of Southern California. His work focused on Latin American media, comparative media studies, immigration, and Latinx media studies. His most recent book, titled Trafficking Narco-Culture in Mexico and the United States, analyzes the way Mexico's criminal drug violence and new media technologies structure publicness in Mexico and the United States. Welcome, Dr. Amaya.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you so much, Mariana. And firstly, I want to thank everybody for being here. And I want to thank the Center for Latinx Digital Media for inviting me, and Pablo in particular for inviting me. It's an honor to be here and share my research with you all. Today's presentation began as a case in my book, Trafficking. And before we go there, let me actually start sharing a few images here. So my book, Trafficking, which was just published in early summer, the book engages with foundational ideas in communication, specifically publicity. It does this within the context of the massive drug violence in Mexico, which in the span of 10 years has killed more than 200,000 people. I'm interested in the way this violence is forcing us to reimagine publicity and changing the ways of being public. For today's presentation, I use the case of the anonymous blogosphere in Mexico to engage more centrally with anonymity, a modality of publicity that I find very complex and very compelling. To the point that actually the current book I'm writing right now centers on anonymity precisely. But let's start by placing ourselves in context, okay? So we are talking here about Mexico, the 13th largest economy in the world, a nation that in the year 2000 experienced a democratic opening that gave us a great deal of hope in the future. In 2006, on the dawn of another presidential election that continued our political hopes, Mexico was transformed almost overnight from a nation flirting with first world status to a one defined by violence and organized crime. This violence has been everywhere, not simply because some calculate that roughly 500,000 people in Mexico work in one way or another for the drug cartels, not simply because the violence has touched millions of Mexicans, but also because the violence has dominated our public sphere, our entertainment industries, and our political rhetoric. Today, I bring you a case in which digital technology, citizenship, and violence meet. El blog del narco. This is an unusual blog that has published thousands of the most grotesque and frightening images and videos known to humankind. Bodies are displayed in horrific ways, in the midst of intense suffering, waiting, frightened for that to happen. There are videos of decapitations, executions, dismemberments. It is awful. El blog del narco publishes news and commentary, but it is best known for publishing gruesome violence, and it has become a true repository of the horrors of the drug violence in Mexico. Even though pain, shock, and even trauma cannot be avoided when interacting with this blog, El blog del narco has been one of the most famous blogs in and from Mexico. And the reasons are complex, okay? But here I want to highlight the type of fame, one type of fame, the type of fame that El blog del narco gathered among Mexicans and not some international observers who admired it because it dared to fulfill an informational gap in an extremely dangerous context. Against the grain of a narcissistic blogging culture that Sisi Papacarisi has characterized as engaging citizens as consumers. This blog seems to contribute to a public sphere in the hope of heightening civic engagement. Because the context is so dangerous, the blog has been anonymous. And today I want to analyze this anonymous publicity. But before we go there, let's see, firstly, what is El blog del narco? El blog del narco is not one, but several blogs and websites with roughly the same names that, according to their DNS provider, originated from 2008 to 2010. All of the domain names connect to Monterrey, Mexico, and to the same email address, suggesting that all of these are or were owned by a single person or organization. It is, however, unclear who has managed or authored the blogs, or even whether these have been managed or authored by the same people. The levels of activity of each of the domains changed throughout the years. One of the domains became the iconic blog del narco. And this one was created in 2010. And for 3 years, it was one of the most important websites reporting on the drug in Mexico, on the drug violence in Mexico. It is still there, but it's inactive. At the height of its fame and influence, the blog received between 2 and 5 million visits per week and would often find itself among Mexico's top news sites. This particular domain, this particular site stopped publishing in 2013, shortly after its alleged author, who calls herself Lucy, published an anonymous book dealing with her work and with her goals. Violence has shaped the reputation of El blog del narco, not simply because of the violent content they publish. The specter of violence has shaped how the blog is made, dictating the necessity to make it anonymous. As relevant, acts of violence have marked like giant signposts the blog's popular standing. In September 2013, 2011, just to give you a sense, The bodies of a young woman and a man who had collaborated with the blog and other social media, in particular Twitter, appear hanging from a bridge in Nuevo Laredo. She hung from her hands and feet, was tortured, semi-nude and disemboweled. He hung from his hands around their bodies. He hung from his hands with a cut so deep that you could see the bones. On the bridge and around the bodies were these yellow posters that are referred to as narcomantas, stating, I'm quoting here, "This is going to happen to all of those posting funny things on the internet. You better fucking pay attention. I'm about to get you." End of quote. These two victims had tweeted and blogged about drug violence and participated in sites like El Blog del Narco. The sign was signed by the Zetas, a violent splinter cartel that has tried to control Nuevo Laredo for some time now. Now, 11 days later, the body of a journalist and blogger, Maria Elizabeth Macias, was found, decapitated, also in Nuevo Laredo, with the signature of Los Zetas again. And according to the narcomanta by the body, Macias was killed for her comments and blogs and in Twitter. On top of her body, the killers left keyboards, a mouse, and other computer parts wrapped around her body. In an interview in 2013, Lucy declared about being highly traumatized by these events as they dramatically reminded her of the precariousness of her situation. The death threats to her and the partner who helped her were constant. That year, I began cobbling together her interviews, her book, her blog comments and writings, and together this allowed me to paint the following picture. Lucy is a young woman in her mid-20s who created the site as a way of filling the informational gap in cities like Monterrey, where violence was rampant and reporting was scarce. Single with children and a patriot, Lucy repeatedly claimed that her actions had the goal of correcting the global perception of Mexicans as corrupt, uneducated, and violent. The blog quickly acquired multiple sources, including cartel members, and was labeled by some as public relations forum for drug dealers. Lucy pushed back against these characterizations. She argued that without El Blog del Narco, people would not be able to find their loved ones, and for no other site or publication is willing to show the type of material they show. What for us is a graphic image of an execution, for a family is painful evidence that they will never see their loved ones again. The blog was under attack from the beginning, not only by the cartels, but also by they experienced cyber attacks by the Mexican government, at least according to Lucy. Quote, "We change where we live every month. We've been in basements. It is very difficult. We hide our equipment in different places. If the authorities get close, we run." End of quote. This was not paranoia, as the killings of 2011 and the dozens of attacks and threats on reporters, bloggers, and Twitters have shown. The cartels and some members of the Mexican government will go to great lengths to control the public sphere. And I ask, what does it mean that civic and political work needs to be carried out in secret? What does it mean that anonymity is accepted as part of civics? Contemporary uses of publicity, particularly in disciplines concerned with expressive culture like ours, show a huge bias towards defining publicity in relationship to openness. There is a general belief that publicity does what it does to our political lives because publicity exists in the open. In fact, I dare to say that most of us confuse public with open or argue for this privileged connotation. If it is public, then it is meant to be seen in the open without walls, like a speech delivered in the Greek agora, which, not coincidentally, is the model many use to especially think the concept of publicness and the realm in which publicness is performed, the public sphere. It is certainly the way Hannah Arendt uses public in the human condition, and it is ultimately true in the influential work of Jürgen Habermas. What does the normative element of openness implies in terms of publicness? Well, it means that to be public, one must be willing to place oneself in the open. Publicness thus tends to be conceived as a spatially reflexive action, if you wish, as a willingness and perhaps even a desire to make oneself visible. Yes, yet this normative idea of publicness, like the biased notion of open public sphere, imply a number of theoretical and historical concessions that cannot be taken for granted. Let's start with the grounded notion that most of us recognize Lucy's work as publicness, even if it's anonymous. And let's try to figure out how is it that anonymity came to be part of our civic lexicon. So I want to probe a bit deeper and explore the tensions inherent between civics, publicity, and anonymity here. And the easiest way to do this is by pointing out that early publicity was often anonymous and that anonymity has been a productive protocol for communication in all societies. Anonymity yields secrets. And scholars like Jody Dean reminds us, secrets are the very justification for publicity. Quote, the public have a right to know. We say to ourselves all the time. In fact, this has become the slogan of contemporary ideas on politics and of information. And it is thus in the unveiling of secrets that democracy and the information age connect. It is thus unsurprising that when, for instance, Yochai Benkler starts his book, The Wealth of Networks, with a statement of faith and says, I quote, information, knowledge, and culture are central to human freedom and human development. End of quote. This is a conventional statement, but there is also an almost mystic belief in information and openness, and because of ideas like these, the unveiling of secrets has become central to our civic and informational imaginaries. It would be easy to believe that we value publicity simply because publicity promises the elimination of secrets. But secrets have a more complex constitutive role in publicity, I believe. And it is not Habermas or Arendt who will help us figure out this, by the way. The clues to this are in the historiographical work of Reinhard Koselleck, who, much like Habermas, traces the rise of publicness from feudalism to the present. Now, in Koselleck, the move from feudalism to enlightened forms of state organization could not happen without new forms of social consent, and publics gave shape to a new form of social consent during absolutism. Early publics appeared in secret societies, communities in which politics was held to moral standards. These secret societies, such as like the Masons, like the Illuminati, the Cosmopolitans, and others, appear because the same cultural and technological conditions that had in the 16th century fueled religious plurality. Think about it, okay? The multiplication of the press, the multiplication of discourse made easier by the printing press, the rise of the mercantile classes, and the emergence of printing in vernacular forms. As many have noted, these cultural and technological forces were the conditions of possibility to pluralism and modern citizenship. So before the coffee houses and salons that Habermas describes so eloquently, secret societies constituted communities of dialogue without hierarchy. The lodges attracted the new classes of people that were acquiring economic and social capital, like the merchants, the new professionals, even the bureaucrats. These groups were gaining social and economic power, but had no power to shape politics. In the absolutist state, these groups needed spaces to come together, spaces that could allow them to share critical views about society and about the state. These secret societies were those places that fostered criticism and political dissent on the one condition: secrecy was required. In the absolutist state, dissent was very dangerous to the dissenter. Now, Koselleck's work is a useful reminder that the value of opacity, of secrecy, of anonymity, and even privacy today in contemporary political cultures is rooted in these early experiences in organizations. So when Thomas Paine anonymously publishes and distributes Common Sense in 1776, he's following simply the protocols of survival and political morality of absolutism. The uses of disguises by the Sons of Liberty in the American colonies did the same. Since early modernity all the way to the present, anonymity remains a tool of dissent and revolution. Pen names and pseudonyms had been normal to critical discourse. Even the US Constitution, of course, was published anonymously early on. Historian Michael Kimmade has noted that a great number of editorial pieces in the 17th and 18th centuries were written under the guise of pen names, and pen names were vital to the public discourse of the American Revolution. Benjamin Franklin went as far as suggesting that the colonies ought to be covered in anonymous writings. Recognizing these practices in relationship to moral and legal impunity, Franklin added that pseudonyms, quote, enable men of honor to behave dishonorably, end of quote. Similar ideas and practices were used in Mexico's War of Independence. In the important months preceding the Armed Rebellion of 1810, for instance, anonymous flyers, broadsides, graffiti, and cartoons were found often in important public places all around the New Spain, but especially in Mexico City, the capital. Timothy Henderson writes about these efforts, including the awful punishments to anyone caught doing the anonymous publishing. Imagine, in 1810, the Inquisition in Mexico set up a force of detectives to chase down malefactors. Hand-operated printing presses were outlawed, and rewards were offered for information leading to the arrest of dissidents. As they had in other nascent modern nation states, anonymity in Mexico was a tool of revolution, and the values of anonymity were grafted deep in the Mexican political imaginary. So in nations like the United States and Mexico, nations born out of revolution and colonialism, anonymity became entwined with heroic narratives, as anonymity was a communicational tool central to the birth of these nations. It is this myth of origin that has helped people characterize Lucy's anonymous work as an example of civics, citizenship, and even a heroic communicational act. Civics and heroicity. How do these connect to anonymity? Let's try to explore this issue of Lucy's heroicity using the work of Hannah Arendt and Selah Ben-Habib quite quickly, or a little bit quickly at least. I wish I had more time. So in The Human Condition, Arendt develops seminal ideas about publicity and modernity that she anchors in an analysis of Greek life. She argues that publicity is possible only through the coming together enabled by language and human communication, which makes possible social arrangements free of violence. To be political, to live in the polis, meant that everything was decided through words and through persuasion and not through force and violence. In Greek self-understanding, to force people by violence, to command rather than persuade, were pre-political ways to deal with people characteristic of life outside the polis. Clearly, the Greeks were also very concerned with avoiding violence and finding methods of social interaction that would eliminate it. Violence existed, but not in the sphere of politics, which was ruled by talk, rhetoric, and the ideal of shared understanding. As Selah Ben-Habib has noted, Arendt's ideas about publicity are not without complications. She uses not one, but two models of publicity. In the Greek city, the public realm was permeated by a fiercely agonal spirit, where citizens had to constantly distinguish themselves through their deeds and achievements. It is a realm eminently agonistic, dramaturgic, the space of heroes. It is not a space meant to be homogeneous, but a stage full of different values that allow some actors and their voices to protagonize debates and positions. This topological thinking is also theatrical, meant to foster passion, thought, and action. This, Ben-Habib notes, is agonistic publicity. There's a second type of publicness, an associational view of the public sphere that inherent is more conducive to positive political outcomes. This associational type of publicity manifests anytime people act together in concert, and is part of Arendt's conceptualization of power, force, strength, and violence. Now, the notion of a public hero, the type of public heroism that some have tried to cast on Lucy, is at home in Arendt's topological, dramaturgical, and agonistic conception of publicity. Lucy claimed that she attempted to reveal the dark, bloody secrets of Mexico's drug cartels. And in the process, she attempted to conquer a style of preeminence, a high point, a stature from which she could share with others her views for a better Mexico. In this agonistic space, the textured drama of life necessitates actors who use loud and perhaps even spectacular forms of personal display in order to command attention. Without attention, the message may be lost. Now, Ben-Habib's concern was not violence, but the separation between the private and the public, and her arguments have stood the test of time, okay? Yet, violence is not simply the fulcrum that allows the public to exist and that should be dismissed once the public is established. Violence is too an activity that should be, using Ben-Habib's own term, phenomenologically de-essentialized. That is, violence simply does not neatly stay outside the walls, and in most places around the world, violence interpenetrates the public sphere. The dismissal of violence reveals a particular perspective in most theories of publicity, which is very common today, and that is the hegemonic view. The dangerous notion that theories of publicity naturally belong to the apolitical ecology in which the state has a monopoly on violence. But that is not the world, and that is not what history shows us either. What is publicity in the bloody modernity that Mexico is experiencing? What is this publicity? What can Lucy's case teach us about the missing parts in these theories of publicity? Now, Lucy's story does not end with her promotion to civic hero by the international community. In May 2013, only weeks after Lucy had revealed her work to the public, her colleague, the webmaster who helped her with the technical side of the website, called her one last time and simply said, "Run." No one has heard from him again. After hiding for a few days, Lucy fled first to the United States and then to Spain. A few days later, she contacted via Skype the writer who had previously interviewed her for The Guardian and revealed to him her state of panic and loneliness. She was staying in a boarding house somewhere in Spain with enough money to last a few months, but was otherwise without contacts and almost without money, without identity in a country not her own. Carol, the journalist, wrote, quote, "Her biggest fear is that she will see her colleague appear on a video of the type that frequently appear on their blog, battered, interrogated, gazing into the camera, knowing a terrible fate awaits." Her stay in Spain did not improve. She wrote, I quote, "Yes, it has been a big mistake to come to Spain. I know Spain is a great country, but sadly, I wasn't aware of the great relationship it has with Felipe Calderón Hinojosa. I accept that it was a mistake," end of quote. A couple of weeks later, Lucy started a personal blog in which she wrote about her quest to survive. Lucy wrote of her struggles, her hunger, the sense of betrayal she had to live with, her dreadful opinions about the Mexican political system, in particular, President Calderón. On July 2013, she published an angry letter asking the international community to help her leave Spain. She seemed aware that her civic quest was understood through a different register than the work of other famous new media political stars like Cuban Ioannis Sanchez or Edward Snowden. She believed that she had not received any help because, I quote, "I am Mexican and not Cuban like Ioannis Sanchez, or US American like Edward Snowden." So casting her profile against the politicized identities of Sanchez, who is a human rights advocate from Cuba, who is engaged in a quest to promote political change, and Snowden, whose identity as a whistleblower against the US government has been lionized by many. Lucy's efforts against cartels and corrupt Mexican politicians gave her no political platform from which to springboard into international fame. Even though the threats of her life were more certain and more terrifying than the risks on Sanchez or for Snowden, Lucy's quest does not fit the parameters of stardom that have become normal in internet celebrity culture. On July 22nd, 2013, a request for funds to get out of Spain was issued by Lucy in the crowdfunding site called capital.com. According to the site, she was able to collect 500 euros, or if you prefer, a pittance. Arendt sheds light on Lucy's failed odyssey, the betrayal that marks her last words in public. When Arendt discusses what Ben-Habib refers to as the agonistic public sphere, she centers her arguments on the nature of pairing action and speech. The actions that distinguish those who deserve to be in public are actions always followed by or explained by a speech. It is through action and speech that individuals reveal their uniqueness and their identity, their difference vis-a-vis the world. Self-disclosure is key here. And perhaps Arendt is right that a hero needs to be in the open, have a face. Lucy's actions, her speech, are quickly becoming erased from memory and were already insufficient in 2013 to incite significant response. This lack of response to Lucy is rooted on the type of mediation she used in her anonymity, which became the production tactic and emblem to the danger of the danger in which she existed. That is, in the process of embracing anonymity, her actions lost the ability to transcend, and they are bound to be forgotten. But why does anonymity has this effect? Arendt's heroes existed in the age of orality. I wanna forward something here, okay? The agonistic realm that she sketches for us is also indebted to her ideas on orality. The courageous act of self-disclosure central to Publicity was courageous, not because, like Hector's fate, showing oneself in public would mean certain death. In the public realm that Arendt presents to us, Achilles is not waiting. Only a stronger debater who will leave sword behind, but not reason. And the political imaginary construed by Arendt and reproduced in most theories of publicity, orality underscores the nature of the courage one must embrace when entering the public realm. This is a courage that trusts the basic safety of those in public. The public realm is a contest of speakers, not killers. Its heroes engage in a war of ideas, not bullets. Now, Lucy's public role could not truly be open. Her heroicity, if that is what we need to call it, could not be attached to her identity like in the case of Snowden or Sanchez. She could not be trusted. She could not trust the visitors of El Blog del Narco, and as she powerfully narrates, her day-to-day activities were carried out in hiding, in fear, by moving from location to location, and by never revealing where she was or who she was. While it worked, her anonymity allowed thousands of contributors and commentators to share their experiences and to view and her views about and with the drug violence in Mexico. But eventually this stopped working. She had to run. Her partner was disappeared. She had to hide. And she had to stop using digital technologies altogether, and without ongoing activity, without exposing her life to danger. Lucy's pleas quickly became alienating, those of an unknown other, one that will likely be forgotten. But she's not forgotten just yet. And I want to take one more lesson from Lucy's odyssey. Like her, I believe that anonymity is not anathema to publicity. Secrets have uses in the public sphere, and not only when administered by and within legitimate institutions like journalism or the state security apparatus. In a world besieged by pluriform violence, the a priori of politics can no longer be the Hobbesian maxim that the state should have a monopoly on violence, or that the state should have a monopoly over secrets. The base of politics should be, like Lucy foresaw on her darkest hour and enacted through her stubborn, inadvisable, and dangerous reporting of violent deeds, a collective imagined street by street, not in the scale of a state or of a nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hector, for this incredible talk. Truly, I mean, I'm blown away. This is truly amazing. Mariana, would you like to get us started in a conversation with a few questions? And by the way, to all the attendees, please feel free to input your questions in the Q&A, and Mariana and I will read them aloud and relay them to Hector. But in the meantime, Mariana, would you like to, I have some questions on my own, but would you like to get us started?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Amaya. This was really, really, really interesting. I have two sort of questions. At the beginning of the talk, you mentioned that El Blog del Narco was filling some information gap. So my question is, do you think this information gap should be filled by something else rather than a blog that is anonymous? That is the first question. And then the second question is, do you think today in 2020, like we right now, we don't have a Blog del Narco as we did 10 years ago. Do you think that right now that space is being filled by something else? Like that space of the Blog del Narco should be, like today in 2020, should be kind of like somebody should appropriate that space?
Thank you, Mariana. These are great questions. El Blog del Narco, you know, occupied this space that was being left open by the self-censorship and censorship of news organizations in Mexico that has been occurring since, well, dramatically since 2010, but has been occurring since the violence spiked in, earlier on in 2007. By the time that we arrived to the teens, if you wish, okay, 2010 and forward, Mexican news organizations had come to terms with the fact that certain types of publishing could not be done at the risk of being killed, the journalists being killed, or the editors being killed, or the place where these things were produced receiving a bomb, or all of these things happened to news organizations in Mexico in the last 10 years. So there has been a certain type of truce between news organizations that is required, by the way. It's absolutely required because death is certain, okay, and threats are certain. And this is not an abstract kind of violence, an abstract type of coercion. It's a real, tangible coercion. The spaces therefore are huge. The informational gaps are gigantic. As much as we read in Mexico about the ongoing violence, and we read a lot because there is so much of it, there are gaps that we simply cannot account for because we don't even know them. We don't know what's happening in our cities anymore. And so these the need in 2008 to 2010, which is when these websites originated, remains today. Should it be filled by what one may call generously citizen journalism, like in the case of Valor por Tamaulipas or El Blog del Narco. It is, I don't know. I just know that these bloggers who have tried to do it without the protection of institutions, many of them had to run. Many of them have been disappeared. And it is a really dangerous proposition. The problem is being anonymous on the digital space is extremely difficult. It requires a technical know-how that most of us don't have. It is not enough to actually have to have a fake email and things like this. You know, we know that the cartels and we know that the Mexican government has digital sleuths to find the people they want to find. And so it is extremely dangerous. Now, the options we have is to have these informational gaps or not to have them. And I don't know that I know how to answer the question in order of what to do about it, you know. Now, as to the last question you have, now the Blog del Narco, one of the domains is still active, by the way. So what has happened is that it has become marginalized because it is no longer relevant. The way that it speaks to Mexicans is not felt in the same way than it felt during the years that Lucy was handling that domain. Okay, so which is super interesting, I think. You know, that the fact that we don't even know anymore that the Blog del Narcos is still there. Not the one that Lucy had, of course, a different domain that is almost the same, by the way. They all are almost the same. I do think that, however, that actually in order to constitute a thriving public space, one needs to be active, you know. Now, as to whether one needs to be active on the space of cartel violence, I think that is inadvisable. I think it is very dangerous. I think we should be thriving in the space of peace. I think we should be thriving in the space of politics and pluralism. I think that's where we should be focusing our actions. I love the work of Clemencia Rodriguez on the subject, on the Colombian violence during her book. The title is escaping at this moment, but her work is extraordinarily useful to me because she helps me understand that the most important civic work that one can do in times of war, especially pluriform war like the one Mexico is experiencing, is to construct peace.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hector. That was a great set of answers. If I can build on that, you know, theoretically, a lot of the conversation in communication and media studies about, for instance, the role of the press is informed by models from, you know, global North countries, in particular the US, secondarily the UK, and also other countries in continental Europe. But what you are describing here is a scenario in which many of the functions of the press are not being performed by the press, and therefore there are, you know, grassroots initiatives that take upon themselves to inform, even at great peril to them. So, so theoretically, so what would you say this? I wonder if you have any thoughts about what this case says about what is really the role of the press outside of, in contemporary world, outside of a handful of countries that constitute the global North, and what do you think is the role of technology in this process? You make very fascinating parallels with technological development that led to the printing press and, you know, public sphere, you know, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think is the role of digital media in the process that you are describing contemporaneously? And I understand that society today is very different from what it was, you know, when Gutenberg, you know, conceived the printing press and got popularized. But I wonder if you have some thoughts on what is the role of digital media in this process?
Thank you, Pablo. I think, you know, to the first question, you know, to the institution of journalism, you know, I think in the Americas, which is the most violent continent in the world, especially for the press, you know, the role of news is has to be attentive to that and has to be shaped by the realities, by the context. And in Mexico, news organizations have been trying, for instance, to normalize the idea of anonymous bylaws, for instance, bylines, sorry, not bylaws, bylines. Trying to adopt actually ways in which one can protect oneself. There are many endeavors, by the way, and many of them were initiated in Colombia as to how to train also the press itself in order to remain safe. What are the professionalism is one of the strongest weapons, if you wish, against the threats of pluriform violence. And in Mexico, the press is still in a process of professionalizing. You know, the first degree on journalism happened in the 1990s. Before that, every journalist in Mexico was self-trained. So we have a greater level of professionalization right now, but in the type of journalistic position that is more at peril, or the one that actually goes to the crime scene, these category of journalists are not the most as trained as, let's say, the political, the ones that receive the political beats, the ones that are speaking about other subjects. So ends up being a matter of training, of professionalizing also, and of recognizing also the limits of speech. And one of the things that has been very important to me, and I remember having early on a conversation with Clemencia, who in our field has done the most work on this space, okay? She writes about the Colombian violence, and I respect her work a lot. And I remember telling her, asking her, what am I going to find? When I began writing, this is a few years back when I began writing this book. And she says, one of the things that struck to her was actually how many of the communicators in radio and in the press felt that their job was precisely to bring the violence and the perpetrators to the open. And she felt at that moment very strongly that that was really inadvisable, that was not actually your job. Your job was to stay alive, you know? And it is only when you realize actually that your first job is to stay alive, and your secondary job is to actually be a journalist of these other things, you know. And so what I like about her work, again, is I'm promoting more her work than mine, which is totally great because it deserves to be read more, is the discourses on peace and the practices of peace. I think that is really important. Now, as to the role of digital media itself, I think the problem with digital media is that that it is a media that allows for, it offers a lot of spatial complexities, I think. And we don't fully understand, most of us who are not researchers of digital media, most of us don't fully understand what it means to be present, what it means to be private, what it means to be anonymous. I think we are confused by the fact that actually the digital media uses terminology that suggests that these practices are clear-cut. So we talk about cyber walls. We talk about all these terminology borrowed from the material world that makes you believe that there is a possibility for privacy, that there is a possibility for anonymity, that all these things are readable in the way that actually were in the past, when you could hide in a room, or where you can actually go in the middle of the night and post literally a publication on a tree, you know, and then run. Okay, so that clarity of that the material space had at that moment is no longer here. And so the question is, what does it mean when the spatial, the space of digitation is misunderstood by most people? And I think our practices should be in accordance to the type of space in which we exist. And I think This speaks also about the impossibility of fully believing in anonymity, and therefore unrest. You know, we cannot fully trust anything that happens on digitation. We cannot fully trust the other.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Hector. Mariana, we have a question in the Q&A. Do you want to?
Yes, we have a question from the audience, and I'm going to read it as it is. Drifting away from the anonymity and focusing a little on the things she published on her blog, I guess Lucy, how do we deal with the bad publicity and the morbo that comes with sharing explicit pictures? For example, with serial killers, we risk copycats. What about this kind of crimes? Aren't we giving gangs and criminal organizations a certain status by showing what can they do to their enemies? And also, it is completely necessary to publish these kind of pictures to get an actual reaction from the public?
I think that's an excellent question that speaks to the type of controversy that the blog del Narco always was in the middle of. On the one hand, we have, and we know that actually what we call gore porn, literally, which is a category of of our visual culture that is related to digitation, that speaks to the fact that violence, gore, has become actually its own genre around the world, not only in Mexico. So El Blog del Narco attracted and came to be related to gore porn, which actually, in a sense, is a concern that we have about the fact that some people are seeking these thrills. And it is a very difficult and conflictive ethical position, the one that seeks out the gore porn. On the other hand, you know, in the specific case of El Blog del Narco, it was criticized for giving literally a springboard in a public space for cartels. So cartels would send all the administrators of these blogs videos of executions in order to inform other cartels that they were trespassing, for instance. When a cartel tried to enter an area that was dominated by a second cartel, they would typically kill people, okay? And Blog del Narco and other publications like this allow for these videos to be shared. So they were actually part of the communication between intra-cartels. So it is a very troubling thing, by the way. It is a very troubling thing. Now, Lucy herself, you know, she defended her position. She defended what she was doing. She began actually, all this began with little publications that were basically posting, like, for instance, a shooting happened in a street of Monterrey that the newspaper did not catch, and someone with a phone actually happened to capture a video. It began with things like that. And soon it morphed into this bigger platform that was very controversial. So I don't know what to do about the controversy itself, by the way. I cannot tell you actually whether this is or is not necessary. I do know that you know that the El Blog del Narco has been mired in that, and the person who asked the question identified the controversy in a sense. That is the issue with El Blog del Narco. Should we talk about it, and should we think about this as useful pro-social contributions, if you wish, or are these terrible ideas? You will have a conflict and you will have actually people who say one and people who say the other, you know. El Blog del Narco, like other blogs, the other blogs del Narco, publish news as well. And right now, the current instantiation of the Blog del Narco, perhaps that's why it's not as famous. It doesn't have the same level of videos and gruesomeness than the old ones had. It has mostly news. And many of these news are also controversial, but they are about violence, and they are relatively graphic, but they are not what they used to be.
Thank you so much, Hector. We have another question in the Q&A. It says, impunity is, of course, a big deterrent for in-depth investigation in Mexico, but some organizations are making great contributions, especially with the help of transnational collaborations, such as the Panama Papers, more recently BuzzFeed's news, FinCEN files. These efforts don't anonymize the Mexican journalists who participate in the projects, but they get the protection of the herd in a way. What do you think journalists outside of Mexico should do to help journalists fulfill the information gap that you and Mariana were talking about?
I think, you know, well, you have to. I agree, by the way, with what the question implies. You know, that international collaboration with international organizations has been crucial for the survival of Mexican press in general. You know, in fact, you know, it is many of these organizations who are training the reporters in order to do best practices to keep them alive, very literally. Okay. This is crucial and has to continue, and I see that as very, very important. One of the things that is also interesting, and perhaps actually that the one that weakens the presumption on the question, is that the presumption that international journalism will help in one way or another Mexican journalism. Now, this presumption is on the assumption that actually Mexican journalism is not thriving, which is not true, by the way. Mexican journalism is thriving. Most important journalists are publishing books now. They are not simply publishing in newspapers. And many of them, the ones that are the biggest voices, actually have the protection of the biggest papers. And they can do a lot of reporting, and there has been extraordinary reporting about the drug war in Mexico by Mexican journalists, published in Mexico, where journalists are fine. So the problem of journalism in Mexico are not the biggest stories about the drug cartels. The problem are the smallest stories. And it is the smallest stories that will not be useful to international journalists, because the international journalists may be helpful with publishing the next scoop about leadership in El Sinaloa cartel, but this is not the issue. The issue is the killing that happened 30 minutes ago, and that a reporter is being asked to actually go and cover, and the type of danger that she is going to be in. And so on the one hand, I agree with the premise of the question and the first part, but the second part, the premise of the question, I think misunderstands the fact journalism is thriving in Mexico. It's simply not. It's in the margins of the issues that actually we see the violence happen all the time.
Excellent. Now, only have a couple of minutes, but I would like to ask you a final question, putting this in a little bit of comparative perspective, and building on one of the things you mentioned. You compare the case of Lucy with the case of Yaoni Sanchez in Cuba, mm-hmm. and Edward Snowden in the U.S. And you rightfully noted that those are have a public stature that and things that come with that Lucy did not have. Why do you think that's the case?
Obviously, it wouldn't have occurred to me to bring these comparisons to the fore without Lucy doing it first. Lucy is the one who compared herself, to Yaoni or to Snowden, and she seemed troubled by the fact that she was being interpreted always in these ambivalent ways, in these ambiguous ways that are reflected even in the questions that we are dealing with right now. The Blog del Narco is not the same than actually advocating for human rights in Cuba. I think there is a clear pro-social endeavor to what Yaoni does. And Lucy surprised me because she actually was surprised that her own endeavor, however more risky, as risky as it was, could not be interpreted or would not be interpreted in the same way. And of course, it is, she published from a space of grayness, no clear whites or blacks. Snowden, whatever you can think of him, there is a narrative of the Snowden that you are either Snowden is a criminal or is not, but there is no in-betweenness. Lucy is always published from this space and morally complex, ambiguous, ambivalent, pro-social and antisocial, and surprised me that at one point she didn't understand why her international stardom could not be the same. Now, that said, I also think that the anonymity is crucial here. I think that part of the way in which Snowden made himself protectable, it was by coming out clean, by showing his face. And so it is a lot of anonymous work happens right now, and it is crucial that we understand that they deserve protection, but we don't know who to protect, you know. Moreover, we really don't have this human connection with the person, you know. It is fascinating to think about anonymity broadly, and I'm happy to talk more in different contexts, you know, about this, but because I'm writing about it, the whole book, you know, but think about actually the way that anonymity is part of the Mexican drug war. I have an image behind me of, let me see if I can show it to you. That's a policeman and protecting his face. So the cartels can be open and show their faces, but the police has to hide their own. This is the world in which we live right now in Mexico, and many places in the Americas and the world is the same. And Lucy was surprised that her contribution was not seen in the same way. For me, it's unsurprising, and anonymity has to do some with it. It doesn't explain fully. The other one is the ambivalent way in which her actions had to be received.
That's absolutely brilliant, and I couldn't think of a better way to end an incredibly enlightening seminar. I want to thank Hector Amaya for giving a terrific presentation and wonderful, truly, you know, illuminating and insightful exchange in the Q&A. I want to thank Mariana Sanchez Santos at American University for a great coordination, introducing Hector first, and then, you know, moderation of this panel. Behind the scenes, Mora Matassi, coordinator of the Center for Latinx Digital Media, and Facundo Suenzo, student at Northwestern University, also providing additional support. Thank everybody for joining us, and I want to invite you to next week's seminar with Angarat Valdivia from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where she'll talk about all things gender and Latinidad in Disney. And hope everybody has a great rest of your weeks, and see you next week. Thank you very much. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paulo. Thank you, Mariana.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.